There's a lot of focus being put on the lack of rain, but is this in some ways a man-made crisis in the Horn of Africa?
Look, David, I think it is a man-made crisis which is compounded by these very unpredictable rainfalls and by climate change, to put it more directly. It is man-made because if you didn't have the situation that you have in Somalia, the consequences would be less dramatic and the delivery of aid and of support could happen more directly. Let me make a second point, which is more the silent crisis that is happening and building up, which is the crisis on food prices, which does affect a much bigger share of the population, not as dramatically, but seriously enough.
Why is it a crisis for people in this region?
It's a crisis because this region is still a poor region where half the population and more live below $2 a day.
So you mean like people could be spending on education and investment and they're spending it on food?
Yes, so they spend, as mentioned, they spend on average half of their income on food. Obviously, if prices go up, they then reduce the food intake. But just to give you the key number for Kenya, the Kenyans consume mainly maize, or poor Kenyans. So on average, every Kenyan consumes 1 bag of maize per year. 1 bag is 90 kilos, so it's roughly 300 grams a day. The price of a bag of maize has gone up over the last half year from something like $20 to $45. So it is a massive increase. And not just the increase as such, it's that volatility. The prices go up and down a lot over the last 2 to 3 years.
Is it that this is just the poorest of the poor that are being affected, or also the middle class?
No, I think it's all affected, because middle class, I think, in such a country like Kenya is defined as having an income of $2 to $10 a day, which is still poor by our standards. And so it does affect everybody except a very small share of food producers. But it's a very small number. It's basically 1,000 farmers who are benefiting from a relatively inefficient system where prices are kept at a high level and to the detriment of the mass of the population. Basically, it's a system of redistribution from the poor to the rich.
When you mean it's a distribution from the poor to the rich, what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah. No, I mean that the poor pay high prices. They do actually in Kenya, and that's the tragedy. They pay higher than the high international prices. So when the international price goes up, in Kenya, in the last 3 years, in 2009 and this year, it went up even higher. So while if Kenyans would buy at international prices, they would just buy at something like $30 per bag of maize. Now they pay $45 per bag.
In the big picture, long-term development of this region, how important is it to dampen food prices or for people to have more money to get food?
Yeah, no, two things, David. One, first, just to also come back to your earlier point on the reason for high food prices. Globally, it has a lot to do with the emergence of China and India and their change of dietary patterns. So there is more need, people in Asia eat more meat, and that's more agriculture intensive, that drives up prices. And the second is that biofuels, thought to be, the magic solution to some climate issues, actually have had a negative impact on food prices. Now, food prices in general don't, there can be situations that they are good for poor countries who are agricultural countries, but not in markets where it's just a very few who dominate this market. If 20–30% of Kenyans would have big fields, produce efficiently for the world market, then first you get the prices probably a bit down because you have more supply, but many more would benefit. But ultimately, if you just look at Kenya's economic structure and basic development transitions, people move to cities, they'll have other jobs than agriculture, they'll have more industrial jobs, more service jobs. Kenya is doing exceptionally well in some of those segments. And then they earn more money because they have scale economies. You can sell your products to many more customers, and you can employ more people, and then you have more money to go and buy food, even if it's at higher prices. So ultimately, you need to get to a situation that people in Kenya and Africa don't use half of their income for food, but they have a smaller share, so that then, like in richer countries, where people are complaining about high food prices, but they're just complaining, they're not suffering.